The sharp crack of a palm against skin rang out through the pressurized hush of the airplane cabin like a whip, slicing the air at 36,000 feet. Every sound vanished. Every passenger on the packed flight sat frozen in suspended disbelief, locked in time by the violent thud that echoed from row 16. Julian Carter, a 16-year-old black teen with sharp eyes and a quiet demeanor, sat stunned, his head jerked to the side from the force of the blow. His left cheek flared red where the hand had landed. Across from him stood Richard Lansing, a middle-aged white man with steel-gray eyes, trembling with fury, his index finger pointed at the boy as if he were some affront to the natural order. "Know your place, boy," Lansing spat, his voice thick with entitlement and venom. The words hung in the air like a toxic fog, poisoning everything in their reach. The rest of the plane was gripped in silence. Some passengers raised phones half-heartedly, others looked away. No one intervened. No one spoke. Julian didn't cry, didn't shout. He sat still, shoulders squared, hands clutching his knees, his expression one of calm forged in countless moments like this one. Only this time, it happened in the sky. From row 23, an elderly man slowly stood. No ruse, no panique. He rose with the kind of quiet gravity that demanded attention without a single word. His gray hair was cut short, his face lined with a lifetime of hard-won truths. He wasn't tall, but he stood like someone who had spent decades resisting the urge to bow. A flight attendant approached, voice clipped, "Sir, please remain seated." "I can't do that." "Not this time," the old man replied, his voice calm but ironclad. Nobody knew who he was, but somehow, everyone sensed something important was about to happen. Julian remained seated. Still. Silent. He felt every stare. The humiliation. The anger. And worst of all, the ache of knowing this wasn't new. He was used to it, but that didn't make it hurt less. He was the son of Daniel Carter, administrator of the Federal Aviation Administration, a man revered for his poise, intelligence, and power. But to Julian, he was simply a father who was always too strict, too cold, a man who measured love in milestones and discipline. Julian had grown up between two worlds, the white-dominated world that smiled to his face and questioned him behind closed doors, and the black community that cheered every step he took with twice the effort, just to break even. He was here for the National Science Decathlon. His project? Gravitational waves and black hole collisions. Advanced, difficult, brilliant. But it was never just about science. It was about proving his worth. To his father, to himself, to the world. Richard Lansing wasn't a man without success. He was a managing director at a global investment firm, used to upgrades, respect, immediate service. A man who shook hands with diversity officers, but scoffed at inclusive policies behind closed doors. He saw Julian, young, black, composed, as a threat to the world he wanted to preserve. This slap? It was a desperate attempt to claw back control. Yet Lansing had no idea that the man who had now risen from row 23 had witnessed something like this once before. During another time, in another country, where silence had cost a friend his life. Julian didn't know him, didn't recognize him. But when their eyes met, something passed between them. Recognition, memory, legacy. Hours before, at Gate D-17 of Hartsfield-Jackson in Atlanta, Julian's father had gripped his shoulder with all the awkward love he could muster. "You backed up your files? USB? Cloud? Sent to Professor Klein?" Julian smiled faintly. 3 times. His father had exhaled, voice softening. "I'm proud of you. Not just for this, but because you stayed strong. Even after your mother. She had never come back from a sabbatical in Paris. A sudden aneurysm. A gaping hole left behind. Julian learned to cook for himself. To study late. To fill that silence. This competition wasn't just an academic goal. It was a silent tribute. On another side of the airport, Lansing was on a call. "Cut the diversity slide. Nobody cares anymore. Focus on results." He walked through the terminal with a kind of arrogance that assumed the world would part to let him pass. When Julian boarded, he accidentally brushed Lansing's arm. "Watch it, kid," Lansing snapped. "First time flying?" Julian responded with grace. "No, sir. Apologies. Already, the game had begun. Julian took his seat in 16B. In the window seat was a girl about his age, hazel eyes, light brown hair buried in dune. She smiled. I'm Camila. These seats weren't built for people with bones. Julian chuckled. Julian, and agreed. In the aisle seat, Lansing, as Julian settled in, Lansing muttered, was hoping you'd sit somewhere else. Julian said nothing. Camila caught the vibe. Her brows furrowed. They passed notes, jokes, observations, laughed quietly. Lansing simmered. Julian's calm, intellect, and rapport with Camila, especially as a black teen, were cracks in Lansing's worldview. When a flight attendant named Nia passed by, her practiced eyes caught the tension in row 16. She'd seen this before. She marked the seat numbers mentally, spoke kindly, and moved on. In row 23, the older man, his name was Walter Grayson, watched silently. Something about Julian stirred old memories. The quiet strength, the careful movements, the smile that masked layers of exhaustion. Then came Lansing's whispered jabs. His comments about scholarships, reverse racism, woke culture, and the forgotten white man. Julian responded with quiet conviction. Fairness, he said, isn't about everyone starting from the same place. It's about removing the barriers so some don't always start behind. Camila chimed in, fire in her voice. Exactly. And the ones who claim they've been left behind usually never had to run twice as far to begin with. Lansing's face tightened. He couldn't intimidate, couldn't patronize, so he tried to provoke. Later, as the flight neared descent, Julian reached for his phone and accidentally bumped Lansing's tray. Some coffee spilled. You people always have excuses, Lansing snapped, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Always blaming circumstance. Camila spoke up. You're shouting at a kid. For what? A splash of coffee? Lansing's voice rose. Oh, now it's your turn to be the woke savior. Let me guess. The oppressed black boy, the enlightened white girl, and the evil old man. The cabin fell silent. Then, with no warning, Lansing slapped Julian across the face. Again, a gasp swept through the plane. Julian sat motionless, stunned. Nia stepped forward. Security will be notified. Now. And then, Walter Grayson stepped between them. You will not touch him again. Lansing faltered. Who are you? This concerns all of us, Walter said. Silence is complicity. Julian looked up. The man's frame was worn, but his voice was a mountain. Solid, unmoving. Then Walter turned. I knew someone like you once. In 1975, in Vietnam. James Henderson, a black soldier, saved my life during an ambush. But before that, before the grenade, he was harassed by a white officer. Denied medical care after the blast. And I said nothing. I survived. He didn't. Julian's eyes widened. James Henderson is my grandfather. Walter nodded, his eyes wet. And I've lived with that silence for 45 years. Until today. Julian couldn't speak. The burn on his cheek still hurt. But it was nothing compared to what was now surging in his chest. Lansing had no retort. Security arrived. He didn't resist. Didn't speak. A nearby passenger had filmed it all. The slap. The stand. The speech. It went viral in hours. Lansing was banned from flying. Suspended from his firm. A man once armored in privilege, undone by his own actions. Julian, Camila, and Walter were interviewed in a quiet room at LAX. A young officer slid a form in front of Julian. Do you wish to press charges? I need time, Julian replied. Walter placed a hand on his shoulder. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about peace. If you choose to act, let be your choice, not pressure, not anger. That night, Julian stood by his hotel window. The LA skyline stretched before him. He didn't know yet if he'd sue. But he knew one thing. He hadn't bowed his head. At the competition the next day, he delivered his presentation with poise. When asked how science and society intersect, he said, some collisions aren't between stars. They're between beliefs. And sometimes, those leave the deepest waves. Later, at a small cafe near Venice Beach, Julian met Walter again. The old man handed him an envelope. A letter from your grandfather. For 1976. I never answered. Julian held it close. Didn't open it. Just nodded. Yesterday, Walter said, I didn't stand up for you. I stood up to earn the right to tell him. I finally did something right. Outside, waves crashed. The sky was clean. And in Julian's pocket, the old man's business card wasn't just contact info. It was a new chapter, a future that begins when someone dares to stand up.